excited to welcome back for part 2, Dr. Brian Emerson, coming to us from Maryland. Hi, welcome back.
Hi, you pulled out the doctor. I should have told you not to pull the doctor out of the bag.
Too late. So Brian is with us from Andiron, his own company, which does a lot of executive coaching. And today we're going to talk about a really interesting topic. And I am so excited to learn about this. We're talking about polarities. Now, you have a book titled Navigating Polarities Using Both and Thinking to Lead Transformation. And if I'm correct,
Yep.
This expands someone's either or thinking to include a both and mindset, which seems so healthy. Can you explain a little bit about the concept of polarities overall?
Yeah, so polarities are those things that everyone, as soon as you explain them, people are like, well, I've been, of course, I get this, right? So it's a lot of times just around the term polarities, but polarities are situations that seem like they're opposite states that have to coexist at the same time if we're going to be successful. And so some examples would be, am I candid or am I diplomatic? Right, like they seem like they're opposites, right? But or and we talk more about like structure and flexibility, right? Is another one. Do I focus on my needs or do I focus on the needs of my friends? Like, do I focus on the big picture or the details? And so there are things when we think that we have to choose one or the other, when actually, if we're going to be successful, we need both, because there are benefits to both sides of the equation, but both sides of the equation can be overused as well. And so when we do one and we ignore the other side, then when we ignore the other side, we can get ourselves in trouble. So that's sort of you've got a quizzical look. So I'm going to stop and then we can.
It's such a, I feel like so many of us are so black and white, one or the other. And so kind of taking this in and digesting it, I'm looking forward to hearing more examples, because on the one hand, I totally agree. The other hand, I'm like, but that's impossible, or someone.
Or
somebody might say, I am, I don't know, like the Myers-Briggs, I am, this, and this.
Yeah.
But I feel like we get pigeonholed. Well, because I think I'm a this, I can't be a this. So that's really interesting.
That's an either or. So the way you just described that's an either or mindset, right? Like either I have to be this or I have to be that. And there's nothing wrong with an either or mindset, right? I mean, if this house is on fire, I either have to stay in it or I have to get out, right? And so there's two choices. And so let's pick, and so there's nothing wrong with either or thinking. It holds the world together, right? Because there are things in life that are problems that have to be solved. There are puzzles that need to be, figured out, equations that have to be balanced. All those things require either or thinking, which is really necessary. And either or is just part of the equation, right? Because there are situations in life that really do, if we're going to be successful, we need both and, right? So we need both of the mindsets. And so it's definitely not about demonizing either or.
Gotcha.
But it's about it. So
that's important to note. Thank you.
It's about expanding,
Right. The idea of expanding. Oh, I love that idea. And actually not demonizing any emotion or feeling goes along with polarities, because it's sort of, I would imagine, all are accepted and all are okay to feel and to have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because when we talk about polarities, if it's a polarity, many times people, myself included, we might demonize one of the poles, right? Like, but if it's a really true polarity, then there's nothing bad about the other pole. There are only bad things that happen if the other pole is overused. So like if I'm somebody who really prefers structure, and I like things to be structured, and I like to have a schedule, and I like a timeline, and I like it, it can be really easy to think about, well, somebody who likes flexibility is they're chaotic and they're out of control and they're, all those things, when, well, that's the overuse of flexibility. Like that's too much flexibility. But flexibility, when it's balanced with, and blended with structure, brings creativity and new ways of thinking. And so it's about, but what happens many times, and sort of jumping all over the place, sorry, is that we can begin to identify so much of who we are by a pole, right? So I'll just keep on with the structure flexibility one, because we're using, we've started it, but I'm the guy who keeps the trains on the tracks. I'm the one who can get the project done on time. I'm the one that when we go on vacation, I know what time we're supposed to be and where, right? And we begin to like make part of our identity about being the structure guy, right? And so then what happens is if we overuse it, then people start to say, every time I go on vacation with Brian, he's got everything so planned out that there's not even time to like sit and think, like, and it's no fun because Brian's too structured, right? And I can begin to overuse it, and we begin to, and part of why I am so fascinated by this is that we many times can begin to create an other, right? Like part of how we make sense of ourselves is by what we're not. And so, and then we can deem, if we have an either or mindset, then, I'm the structure guy. And I'm not like Rachel because she's chaos. Rachel she's out of control. Every time you go on vacation, she doesn't know what she's going to do, when she's going to do it. And blah, blah, blah. And we begin to make you wrong and me right. And then that creates all kinds of suffering, right? But like with a both and mindset, of saying like, if it wasn't for Rachel on our last vacation, who said that we should keep an afternoon open, and that we shouldn't plan anything for that afternoon, we would have never found that great hiking trail that we went on. Like we discovered something completely new, thank God, and so when we can have a both and mindset, we can create less suffering. So, yeah.
That's such a brilliant example because I think everybody can relate to that. And especially how on something like a vacation, both are so important because the structure is really important because you have to know where you're going. On the other hand, if the plane gets delayed, the structure person gets very upset and the flexible person says, oh, it's okay. So, wow. So it really feels like in polarities, if you will, everything is welcome in a way, and everything is embraced. And I know that a lot of your work.
So if it's a polarity, again, like if it's an either or, what I mean? Like this is like, so not everything's a polarity, right? You know what I mean? So, being a racist and not being a racist. Well, both of, that's not a polarity, right? And so, so there are bad things, right, about racism, right? And so if it's not a polarity, then yeah, there can be bad things. But if it's truly a polarity where there are two states that are interdependent, right? They're they seem like they're opposites and both are needed for success over time, then there's not bad things. There's only cases where one might be overused. Like that's the.
Thank you for making that distinction. That is really important because it is important to frame things. We're talking about polarities, but it's important to frame things to check in to say, is this really an either or, should it be an either or right?
Yeah.
I know a lot of your work is done through companies to improve their productivity as well as interpersonal communication. Can you share examples of how you've seen polarities really transform a workplace?
Oh yeah. So one of the things about polarities, don't let me get off topic, but one of the things about polarities is that they're so that's your job, is that they're everywhere. They are everywhere, and they can have really bad repercussions. But the good news is that they all work the same way. And once you learn the formula, right, then you can navigate any polarity anytime, right? And so the basic formula, what I sometimes use is if I'm working with a group, and this is based on Barry Johnson is the man that I learned almost everything I know about polarities, is really comes from Barry Johnson. And one of the examples that he uses that's just so great is inhale and exhale, right? And so if you get a group and if you say, so everyone take in a deep breath, and now breathe in some more. Now breathe in some more. Take in a breath. Take in another breath. And you get them to hold it over time. You're like, how is that? Everyone says that, oh, if you want to relax, take a deep breath. You don't look very relaxed. Well, it's because they didn't exhale, right? So inhale, exhale works like a polarity. And so when we take in oxygen, right, when we first take in oxygen, it feels really good, right? And so any pole of any polarity, when we start to focus on it, good things happen. Really good stuff happens and it feels good. But if we ignore the other pole, all that good stuff turns bad. All that oxygen in our body turns into carbon dioxide, which is a poison inside of our body. And then that's a problem. And the solution to that problem is not to breathe more. The solution to the problem is to exhale, to go to the other pole, right? And so in any polarity, if things are too structured and stifled, what's the answer? Make them more flexible, right? And so any polarity, and so you go to the other pole, you release the carbon dioxide, that feels really, really good. But if I ignore inhale, I end up with no oxygen, right? I'm in the overuses of no oxygen. And so then you want to go back, right? And so helping people understand that the dynamic between this is that both poles have benefits and both poles have overuses. And what we want to be able to do is to figure out how do we look at the benefits and create what Richard Rohr calls a third way. Richard Rohr is a priest who has an organization called the Center for Action and Contemplation, which is a polarity. He doesn't really talk about polarities, but he talks about all of these polarities, right? Action, contemplation. And he talks about the blend being a third way, which we write about in the book, that it's when we can blend the benefits of both to figure out what is a third way that combines, that combines them. So to your point about, you got me all wound up. I know I'm supposed to be answering a question about impacts in organizations, and I'm going to, but I'm going to take a breath. Do you want to?
Yeah, because
I'm just going.
I wanted to add something. When we were talking, I kind of felt like, a hot shower feels really good, like when your muscles are sore. A cold shower feels really good when you're hot. And like you're in the shower, like, well, I want it to be hot, but if it's too hot, you got to add the cold to make it a pleasant experience. It kind of is the same thing where like they each have merit for different reasons, but you want to have just the right temperature so you're not freezing or burnt in your shower. Is that the
What? Yeah. Yeah, and the only way to do that though is to have a both and mindset, right? If your mindset was it either has to be hot or cold,
yeah,
it can't be both, then
yeah.
you would never think about how do I blend? Like how do I blend those, right? And so both and mindset allows us to start thinking about how do I hold both of these seemingly opposite things at one time, right? The Olympic sprinter Michael Johnson from the 96 Olympic Games, when someone asked him, what is the secret to winning the 100-yard, 100-meter, race? He said, it's all about how you come off the blocks. And when you come off the blocks, you have to be completely exploding and completely relaxed at the same time.
Wow. Right.
To be in a state where you are completely exploding and at the same time completely relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's right? And so for me, that's a great example of like third way of like, and we've all had situations where we do it all the time, right? With, different polarities. What I find is that different organizations and different people, individuals, have tons of them that they do naturally and really, really well. And they have a couple that they have a real strong preference for one pole over the other,
Yeah.
and so, I know for myself, I don't think much about structure flexibility. Sort of do that one pretty naturally, right? But as a leader, I pay a lot of attention to direct and empower my employees. How much direction do I give and how much empowerment do I give? Because I have a real preference for empower, so much so that I will overuse empower,
Mm-hmm.
right? And leave people like, well, what are we supposed to do? Like, what is the blah, right? But I have such an aversion to direct. And what keeps me from direct, and this is very typical, is not that I don't think direct is a good thing. I'm afraid of the overuses of direct.
Right.
I don't want to be seen as controlling and demeaning and all those things. So in my mind, right, I have equated that pole with its overuses.
Right.
And so that keeps me in an either or mindset, right? And so I'd rather be too empowering than be seen as a dictator,
Yeah.
right? But direct doesn't mean dictator, right? I mean, and so for me, I have to pay a lot of attention to what's the third way mindset. And I actually keep it right here on my computer in front of me, that as a way to think about like, oh, I'm going into this meeting. How do I stand in the third way of direct and empower in this meeting, right?
Wow.
And so that's one way that I know that I have changed. But polarities create a lot of suffering inside of organizations. Like a lot of like the research that I did really showed that there are natural stages that if people are in a polarity situation and they don't have a way to make sense of it, right? So I say like it has them and they don't have it, right? Um, there's some really predictable stages that people go to. They prefer a pole. They begin to attach part of who they are to the pole, like we talked about with the structure. I'm the train, keep the trains on. Then they begin to create an other, right? And they make the other person, the other group wrong. Well, marketing always blah 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 blah, and we make the other wrong, and that leads to bad communication, poor results, lower morale, less ability to problem solve and to think innovatively. And so when you can teach people how to use more of a both and mindset, right, by using some of the things that we talk about in the book and using it and mapping it through what we call the Polarity Navigator, then you're able to get them to really shift, and one of my favorite stories is I was working with a hospital system with a colleague in California, and they had a number of hospitals that were part of this system. And the CEO calls up and says, "You've got to come in and work with my executive team because they're going to kill each other, right? Like they're backstabbing, they're just everything, right?" And so we went in and started talking to people and realized that he was right. I mean, people really were ready to kill each other, and um, it was bad. Like when you walked in the room, you could feel how toxic it was. Like it was just, and so all the hospitals were suffering, right? Because that's what happens. Um, and through this course, we realized that not everything's a polarity, but in this case, there was a real polarity at play where there were like two camps inside of the organization. There was sort of this one camp that was really had the mindset more about focusing on taking care of patients, right? Like taking care of patients and taking care of employees. And that's really, really, really important. And there was another camp that was led by the CFO that was focused on running a business, right? Because the hospital has to stay in business, right? And so the CFO had been hired 10 years earlier to bring the hospital out of bankruptcy.
Oh.
He prided himself on he was the one that saved the hospital from being bankrupt, and in his mind, that was how they served patients, right? Was making sure we keep the lights on, right? Like, you want oxygen, I'll make sure we've got money for oxygen, right? But the other camp, they weren't caring. And so it was like this. And so everything was a fight between, are we taking care of employees or are we going to run a business? And in healthcare in our country right now, hospitals have to do both, right? And so in the midst of this, there were these two people who just like hated each other. And in the midst of working on this, when we laid everything out, I'll never forget the one guy, the one guy, I'll call him Scott. All of a sudden I heard behind me, and Scott had been all like, like this, like the entire time. And I turned around and he was completely relaxed, right? And he looked across the room and he said, I get it. I get it. And he looked across the room at this woman, I'll call her Maria. And he looked at her and he said, "You're not wrong." He said, "You're not wrong. And I'm not wrong. Neither of us is wrong. And this thing has us, and we've got to figure out a way, because like we're both right, And in that moment, I always say it was not Pollyanna after that. I mean, there was still like, but you could, like, the ice began to break, you know what I mean? Like there was people. And so it can be life-changing, for people to really think about polarities and open up into a both end. So yeah, sorry, I geek out on this, obviously, so you get me going, and I just
Right. No, it's great. And listening to you speak, I really think to myself, this would be so helpful to save marriages and save friendships. And
oh,
when people are so, I'm right, you're wrong, and the other person's the same way, oftentimes there's no getting past that, and they can't see how two people can both be right. Which brings me to
yeah.
my next question, which is, on a personal level,
Mhm.
for our own emotional well-being, how can we use polarities to help us in our daily lives and on our choosing happiness journey? Because I feel like this could be really essential to that in that.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of ways, I think. When I think about specifically choosing happiness, I think about my colleague Kelly Lewis, the co-author of the book. Kelly Lewis, who is I've learned so much from. She's brilliant. We have 6 polarities that we think most humans have to deal with. They're not necessarily the 6, but there's 6, key polarities. And we actually have an assessment where you take the assessment to, see how you're navigating the two, the polarities. But so when you ask about happiness, my mind goes right to those. I think one is around navigating the polarity of desiring more, and appreciating what is, right? Sort of, I think you and I last time talked about gratitude, right? And so,
Yes.
like, wanting, like, I want to do better. I want to raise the bar. I want my business to grow. I want all these things. And you know what? I am completely content right here, right now. Right. Like, and both of those have to be true. If I want to choose happiness, like, I have to be able to know, how do I stand in the third way of desiring more and appreciating what is, like, what is that with that.
That's a great
Um,
example, but I have to say it's also tricky because the people who desire more, which I believe is really important, could they look at being content with what is as settling or not?
so there you go. That's a great example. Settling is the overuse. It's the overuse of appreciating what is. And so you're exactly right. They will. People who have a preference for desiring more will
Mhm.
see appreciate, if they have either a mindset, they'll see appreciate as its overuse, which is settling, as opposed to looking for what are the benefits of appreciating more, which is contentment,
Right.
right? Like, there's And so, and same thing, people who prefer settling will see desire more as being never satisfied and aggressive,
Yes.
right? As opposed, you know, we tend to see people who prefer the other pole in terms of the overuses of that pole, not in terms of the benefits of the pole, right? And so I'm not saying it's easy, right? But that's like being able to find that sweet spot of being completely exploding and completely relaxed,
Yes.
completely wanting more and completely being content with what is and appreciating what I have. That's where happiness is going to happen, right? I think another one is probably for choose happiness is probably focus on my needs and focus on the needs of others, right? Like
Oh,
if I want to be in relationship and be in and be happy and be truly not just superficially happy, like, oh, I'm happy, but really superficially content in relationships is going to be standing in a spot of the third way where I'm focusing on my needs and I'm focusing on the needs of others. Like both are getting met, right? And I think that's another biggie for
and
happiness.
that really comes to mind, at least for me, with parenting, because there's
Oh,
that there's the whole thing of my kids' needs come first. They have to. I'm a bad mother if they don't. But then again, that's the overuse,
yeah,
because then when we get depleted, we can't get, the whole oxygen mask, that whole thing. But we don't,
exactly.
I feel like we don't allow ourselves to go to the way that it, or if we look at it as a negative, as the overuse of something
Yeah,
as negative. If I take care of myself, I'm selfish. And that's so not true.
I'm
But like
selfish.
we go there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, give me another
yeah.
one. Can I have another one?
So like this. I love it. I think another one that plays into happiness is probably, I can think of two. I'll give you two. How about that?
Okay.
One is taking responsibility, right, and forgiving, right? I think both of those for self and for others, like in any situation, like how do we hold ourselves responsible and how do we let ourselves off the hook, right? How do we forgive ourselves? Or in our relationships, how do we expect people to take accountability and at the same time be forgiving, right? I mean, that's and then the other one I thought of simultaneously when you said it was taking things seriously and holding them lightly is like everything I do matters more than anything in the world, and none of it matters because I'm going to be dead in 50 years anyway. So really, who cares? Like it's like being able to really take things seriously and just hold them lightly, I think really plays into contentment and happiness and, you know, um, so
Yeah, that's really huge as I'm just kind of thinking about it, because again, if you look at holding something lightly, then it's, well, you obviously don't care. And it's like, well, I do
yeah,
care.
the overuse,
Right. But I'm
the
just going to hold
overuse.
it lightly because I can see that in perspective, it's not as vitally as important as I'm making it, in this moment.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So you're the way you're naming like the how we see the other pole and the overuse is that's so spot on. Like that's what happens. I mean, that's so really happens.
This is really cool. This is really, all my cogs are like, like,
Yeah, it's a fun different way of thinking, of supplementing our again because either or is so important. Not saying either
Mhm,
or is not important, right?
mhm.
Um, but if it's a polarity, we really need the both and like we really need, you know, really, really
So
need
much
both
of this, I
aspects.
think, involves being mindful and, if you will, stopping ourselves if we're in either or behavior to check in and see, is this really an either or behavior? And I think, especially
Yeah,
in our lives right now, we don't take the time to stop. We just go, we go, we do, we're busy, and all that. And so, are there any kind of like exercises or practices you could share that help us to stop and assess?
yeah. Um, I wish that I had like ones that yeah, but the the biggest thing that I typically encourage people to do is that if you're in a situation that feels like you're caught between a rock and a hard place, right? Like or you feel like here we are again, or you're in a situation where you think, why can't I figure this out,
Mm.
right? Just to, like you just said, just to pause, just to stop, because we go so quickly to problem solving mode, right? Like we're so good at solving problems, right? Which is why our species has survived as long as we have. Um, but to be able to when you notice or you notice that you're in tension with someone else, right? And you notice, just to pause and ask yourself, wait, is this a polarity? Because most of the time, if people can just ask themselves, wait, is this a polarity, right? Is this a both and? It shift your mindset just enough to be able to do something differently. So, so I often say, like, if you're faced with a problem, pause, like before you jump in to your typical reaction, ask, is it a polarity?
Yeah,
So, and
that's
return to the breath, like breath. Yeah, the breath is such a huge resource. That inhale, exhale, like remembering to breathe and using that as a source of a reminder of the natural flow, between, because these polarities, none of this is new, right? I mean, polarities have been around as long as humans have been here, right? It's not, in the East, they've got the concept of, yin and yang, right? Is a polarity, right? Yin energy, yang energy, right? Aristotle and Plato both said the universe is comprised of opposites, right? The opposites are the foundational building blocks of, and so it's, none of it's new, but I think where we are as humans is that we finally can help begin teaching people how to make sense of them, right? And if we can make sense of them, then we have them; they don't have us.
yes.
And then we can choose to do something differently, right? We can choose a different third way. So,
And what I also hear
yeah,
you saying is that we need to be able to give ourselves the permission to think about something in a different way. Just because we've always thought about something this way doesn't mean it's necessarily the right way. It may have served us before, but now we can say, well, what if I just try looking at it this way? And I think that's sometimes the biggest hurdle, because if we are thinking of stuff as very black and white, right and wrong, I think to give ourselves permission to say, let me just examine this other idea,
yeah.
hmm.
And I love how you said that, because, Rachel, because it one of the things that I think happens is that many times people will say, well, I can't hold it lightly because then I won't be taking it seriously. And if I stop taking it seriously, then this is going to happen. And, then I won't meet the deadline if I don't take it seriously, and that's an either or mindset, right? But with a both and mindset, we're able to ask ourselves, how can I hold it more lightly without losing the benefits that I get from taking it seriously? Because I don't have to lose those. Do you know what I mean? Like, how can I start to take care of myself without neglecting my children, right? Like
Right.
without losing the connection I have to my family, right? Like, there's people will always be able to answer a question, but it's about how do we set up that problem statement. If I ask myself, how do I take better care of myself? Question mark. And I've got an either or mindset, then I'm going to be like, well, I can't, because if I do, then, the family's going to get neglected. But if I ask myself, how can I take better care of myself without losing the connection that I have to my family? It's a different problem statement, and you'll come up with a different solution. Right.
Yes. 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 I just want to keep saying yes. That's so, so great.
It's
You
the way
know,
that
yes.
without losing is the key, right? How can we build in more flexibility into our vacation so that we've got some downtime and time to breathe without things being, without losing the predictability, right? That gives us some peace of mind.
Right.
Right? It's
Right.
always what's the benefit that we want over here without losing one of the benefits that we have over here. So,
Yeah. It's brilliant, and I think you're right that we do come across these multiple times a day, but we just don't tune into them
Yeah.
to make decisions that might benefit us better than jumping to the extreme, either extreme. I was also thinking we're big pro and con lists people. Well, I am, and now my family has become. And we have this big whiteboard and like with college decisions and everything. And even friends will come over and I'm like, you want to get out the whiteboard? Let's do a pro and con. I get very excited. And I'm very visual. I want to be able to see it.
Yeah.
And what's great about that is it cuts the noise and you can see, oh, there's benefits to this and there's benefits to that, or there's the con of that originally I thought
Yeah.
was what's the word? Unbreakable, but oh no, it's really not. And anyway, so I feel like pro and con lists are another tool with polarities because then you can see the whole picture.
So the difference between, but it's exactly right. Like pro con lists are great for problems, either or decisions, right? The difference between that and a both and decision is that there are no cons. There are only overuses. So it's a benefits or pros, right? And overuses because there are no cons to flexibility. There are only bad things that happen when we overuse flexibility. There are no cons to structure. There are only bad things that happen when we overuse. So when we talk about a polarity, we talk, instead of pros and cons, we talk about the benefits or the pros and the overuses. And that's a big shift.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Oh yeah, it is.
Okay, I'm letting it all sink in because when you said there are no cons, I'm like, that's new to me, but it's so true. That's so true. I need a minute. Just a minute. Wow.
I get it. I did. I've been there. Yeah, I mean,
That
it's just,
also,
it's amazing. And that really, that can,
I was just gonna say, and that's again the permission of saying there are no wrong answers here. It's just the overuse of that. Okay, say what you were gonna say while I'm marinating.
I was just going to say that it's just, that's one of just such the beautiful parts of polarities, that when groups, people, relationships, as you were saying, are in tension with one another, helping them see that there aren't cons to the other side is changing. I mean, it's life changing, right? Because it's like, oh wait, so there aren't, that's about you overusing, and that's a completely different thing than saying it's bad. All I'm asking, I don't want you to give up flexibility. I'm just asking you to bring in a little more structure, right? Like,
Right.
like, because there's, now that doesn't mean that the impacts of those things aren't bad. I mean, they can have bad
Right.
impacts, and we have
Yeah.
to be responsible for the bad impacts and all of that. But the pole itself isn't. There are no
Right.
cons. So
And that being accepting of all of the viewpoints in order to make the correct decision that's right for you is that really is life changing. I'm a big fan. I need like a cheerleader outfit with like polarities on the, give me a P.
I love it.
I'm so in. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, obviously, I like to geek out on it, so I'm happy to talk at any point.
No, it's
Yeah, it's life changing, and they're everywhere, and they are playing out in our country and our nation right now. They're playing out in our families. They're playing out in the world. I mean, if you look at Brexit, if you look at our political system here in the United States, if you look at the racial, what's happening, with race relations right now in the United States and systemic racism, so many polarities
yeah.
just at play all
Yeah.
over the place
Yeah.
there. And it's because so my hope and the hope of my organization is that we can help supplement the thinking of the planet, right? And raise the consciousness to have different conversations, right? Through both and. because the world needs it,
It
so.
does. We need to get you on the phone with some people, I feel like. Who do we need to call? You gotta talk to this guy. Well, I could talk to you all day, but tell us please where we can find your book and where we can find Andiron, your company.
So the book, Navigating Polarities, if you go to navigatingpolarities.com, you can download a free Polarity Navigator, which is a tool that helps you make that list of benefits and overuses, that we talked about, available on Amazon. Yeah, and then the company is Andiron, and which is based, it's got the word "and" in there. I don't know if you noticed that or not, but it's like, you're like, aha! I love it. There you go. And andirons hold the logs so that air can get to the fire, because fire needs fuel and the absence of fuel in order to burn, and andirons make that possible. So anyway, so Andiron, the website for andiron.com, we are a new organization, and so the website will be up in the middle of May. So for listeners who are, yeah, it's andiron.com. So
Wow.
at any point, reach out with questions. Obviously, I geek out on this stuff. I talk to people about it all the time. Not everything's a polarity by a long shot, but a lot of things are. And when they are, this is a really good way to think about them. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to learn a lot. I learned so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so grateful. We may have you back for part 3 sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I would love it. You're like so fun to talk to that I would come back anytime. So you just let me know. We can. We'll have you take the assessment, and we'll debrief it, and then all your listeners can look at you, and you can talk about how you navigate your polarities. How about that?
That sounds great.
Anyway, best of luck.
Let me get right on that.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mwah. Take good care.
Bye.